Howdy, howdy. We are live on another Friday night for the weekly live Tex-Trek show, and we have a brand new episode of Star Trek Prodigy to discuss. I have some wonderful people on board to talk about this episode with me, and I see we already have some people in the audience, so this is an exciting one to talk about if you're a TOS fanboy. I want to just go ahead and jump right into it, so let's get started. I'm Fathery.
This is Dave.
I'm Aaron.
And this is Tex-Trek.
Engage.
Welcome back aboard the Starship Texas for the 216th installment of the Tex-Trek podcast, the home of Star Trek fandom from deep in the heart of Texas, where we take a deep look at Star Trek old and new. And tonight we are talking about Star Trek Prodigy, Season 1, Episode 13, All the World's a Stage, written by Aaron J. Waltke, who is, here's a surprise, I think he actually has just beamed in. He's actually here on board. Aaron Waltke, how the hell are you?
I'm good. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, yeah, I think we can hear and see you great. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, live logs improper, as they say.
Yes, already in our out in our audience, people have are throwing that one out there.
That's going to be around for a while, I think. I think you've started something, Aaron.
If I
don't see that on a T-shirt.
If that's my main contribution to the Trekiverse's meme generation, then I'll die happy.
Yeah, I think it's going to stick around a while. So it's one of those things. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to talk about this episode with you. And if anyone in our live audience has any questions for Aaron, please by all means sound off and let us know. But yeah, this is going to be a real treat. We've talked to some Star Trek writers before, but they've always been dudes on the older shows, the legacy shows, I guess is like the proper branding terminology now. So it's cool to talk to I guess one of the young writers. Is that the appropriate way to say it?
I'm the hip new almost 40-year-old writer.
Well, sorry, Father. Go ahead. But just when we get a moment, someone is just asking in the background, what is that instrument that you are playing?
Yes. Well, I am an eccentric, if nothing else, and that is in fact a hurdy-gurdy, which is a medieval instrument that is both a bowstring that you play with a crank, and then there's a keyboard on it. It is woefully out of tune, so I won't subject you to the horrible noises it will make if I try to play it right now.
I'm very familiar. I listen to a lot of folk metal, so
so there you go.
I've heard a lot of those.
It's very drony and cool and strange. Look it up on YouTube. I recommend it.
Absolutely.
Well, before we dive into this episode with Aaron, we have Aaron Waltke and Aaron Harvey. So we just need Dr. Aaron McDonald and her husband Aaron to show up.
Aaron.
I know. Should I text them? Maybe they can come on.
Hey, what are y'all doing?
I knew them before, like Star Trek. Even like we would hang out at our improv show, so it was like we were the triumvirate of Aarons. So, like, the three of us
at Mission Seattle. I want to see if I can get like all four of y'all together in like one picture.
Nice.
The universe would implode. We'd melt like in Time Cop if we touch.
But yeah, I think we're gonna have a lot of fun getting into this episode. Before we do, just want to give a quick shout out to the director Andrew L. Schmidt, and also a thank you to all the Tex-Trek patrons out there, everyone who helps us out on Patreon. Starfleet Boy, Kick is Eternal, Gay Clevin Lundstrom, Crazy Dutchy, Joanne Robertson, Quarkspar, John Dawes, and our anonymous supporters. Thank you all so much. I lied to y'all last week. I said that we're going to do the Patreon watch along on November, I think I said 15th. We're actually doing it on the 19th. So that's like next Saturday. We're going to be watching the Discovery episode, Forget Me Not. So yeah, if you want to join in on that, just go ahead and sign up for the Tex-Trek Patreon at whatever tier you want to help us out at. But with that out of the way, yeah, I just want to again remind the live audience, if you have questions for Aaron, please sound off. And Aaron, there's a thing we like to do whenever we have a new guest appear on the show for the first time, and that is just kind of ask you your relationship with Star Trek. You know, before you had a job on an actual Star Trek show, just kind of how did you first enter the fandom, and you know, what was kind of like your first encounter, your first contact with Star Trek?
Well, sure. I'll phrase this the way I phrased it for Kate Mulgrew, who made fun of me deeply for it, which is my first grace with sentience was one with Star Trek. And it basically one of my earliest memories as a human being was sitting on the couch with my dad. And I didn't know why it was exciting, but it was palpable. There was an energy in the air, and I was watching the secondary hull separate from the saucer, and there was the fanfare playing, and I realized that I was watching the world premiere of Star Trek: The Next Generation way back in September of 1987 with my dad. And you know, it was very exciting. I didn't know why. But I was clearly feeding off my dad's vibes because he was a very old school TOS fan, and you know, it just kind of became something we bonded over. You know, I remember one of the first action movies. Some of the first action movies I ever got to go see when I was younger were Star Trek movies that I saw with my dad, and you know, I remember every year when I didn't know what to get him as a toy or a Christmas present, I would just get him like a Star Trek toy. Like he had this communicator badge, which, I actually have it right here. He sent it to me after I mentioned it. It was one of these communicator badges.
That thing, it's
like
huge.
Yeah, it's like an inch thick, and it makes the wrong noise, and it lights up. But
nice.
We turned it into a Christmas tree ornament.
It feels like it should be a Christmas tree ornament, but you actually would like pin it to your chest. But yeah, so that was my introduction to Star Trek, and you know, I absorbed it by osmosis, which I think there is a certain level of Trek fan that just kind of like it. Oh, it was always there, you know. And TOS, which is obviously quite relevant for today's episode. You know, TNG was my gateway, but then over the summers, both my parents worked, so sometimes they would drop me off at my aunt's house, and you know, she had, you know, stuff to do, so she would just plop me in front of the TV. And for some reason, our local PBS station on like Saturday, like weekday afternoons during the summer, would air TOS back to back, and so I got to see so many things I probably shouldn't have seen when I was like 5 or 6, you know, like Caliphie death battles and dancing women, Orion women, but also, you know, amazing episodes like A Piece of the Action and things that just like, as a kid, I didn't have the words to articulate it, but it was just sort of like, wait, how are they going to a planet and they're all gangsters? They have to explain this somehow. and they do, kind of. But that was, to me, that was always sort of Star Trek, was take a very bold swing with a completely, as my friend Tilly Bridges would say, a bonkers premise, and then just find a way to scientifically deduce from there.
Kids have to learn about Iosians at some point.
Yes. Talk to your kids about Iosha 2.
That seems very appropriate, though. There's definitely, I felt like, you know, a familial streak threading through the very episode we'll be talking about tonight. So it certainly makes sense that it was an early bonding thing with your dad.
Yeah, that's really cool, and that also must be weird for, you know, someone who was watching Star Trek in the 80s and 90s and saw, you know, Voyager when it came out, and now like you actually get to like write dialogue for Catherine Janeway to say, and that's crazy, but that must be really awesome.
It is. I mean, it was sort of doubly crazy just because my family, my dad's side of the family, is from Bloomington, Indiana, and so
Oh, wow.
and I lived in Bloomington for many years. Went to college there. Jerry Taylor was obviously an alumnus there. She donated all of her personal effects from Star Trek to what's called the Lilly Library, which is like a rare manuscript library. They have like the Gutenberg Bible, but they also have like Jerry Taylor's hand annotated notes from TNG and Voyager, which I got to read. Like if you're a student, you can check them out. And so I got to learn how to write screenplays from reading her scripts. And also we had Lee Sheldon who was a TNG writer. He was a professor there at the time. So there was like something in the air that felt like I was destined for like at least to give it a shot. But 2005, there wasn't really like I graduated in 2006, the year after Enterprise got canceled, and so everybody was just like, "Well, Star Trek had a good run," and I'm so grateful that there's to be part of this kind of third wave of Star Trek, of this renaissance where we get to celebrate it, and I get to be a small part of it, in this truly wild and weird and wonderful world we all love it.
Sure, yeah. We're close to the same age, and I remember that in 2005 when, I was a baby when TNG started, and then, Enterprise got canceled, and I was like, wow, like this is like you can do this. You can just like not have new Star Trek. Like what's going on here?
I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
I was like, but what's the next series? That was basically my reaction.
So now that
it's like when Doctor Who went off the air.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. But now that we have all this new shows in production at the same time and have 50 episodes coming out every year, it's like, no, this is like normal. Like I grew up when like DS9 and Voyager were both on. Like I'm used to getting like this much Star Trek a year. So yeah, like we've returned to normalcy for me in at least one aspect of life.
There's more variety now because we get maybe about the same amount of episodes, but they're all just spread out over different series and stuff too, which is great.
Yeah, which has been also kind of interesting because that one of the great conundrums I feel like that the Berman era was always wrestling with was sort of like franchise burnout, right? And I think having DS9, like they tried to kind of overlap it so you'd only have maybe 2 shows on at the same time, but there was I think at least one point, or at least in like the 2370s in the Star Trek timeline, where you had 3 shows set at the same time, and it became quite unmanageable. And the movies that they were writing, and it was a lot to juggle. And I feel like it was a little harder because all of those shows, while they did have kind of like their own flavor, I would say Voyager and TNG were closer to each other than say Picard and our show. They're very different stories that are being told.
For sure. Well, speaking of your show, I do want to talk about this week's episode, but I just want to, kind of give some quick thoughts, and then I'll see what Dave and Aaron Harvey think about it. But
tell me what you really think.
I'll shoot straight with you, but
we'll wait until you're live on the air to tell you what we actually think.
But no, I thought that like the cool thing of this episode, and the cool thing of Prodigy in general, is that it is a very great gateway drug into Star Trek if you are a young audience that is unfamiliar with the other shows. I said last week, when we were dealing with the Borg, I felt that the beauty of that episode was after a 25-minute story, a young kid who's never watched Star Trek before Prodigy would basically have understanding of everything about the Borg, the way they assimilate, the way that everyone is terrified of them, the like catchphrase, resistance is futile, all that was like packed in there. So that was really cool. And I think this episode kind of addresses the original series and not just like its place as, a foundational show that's inspired this 56-year-long franchise, but also just kind of the role it kind of has in pop culture. And yeah, it was older, it's like a little bit of a different style, but it's still cool, and people like to dress up and cosplay, and there's people who do like bad William Shatner impressions, but that's kind of a pop cultural icon. And yeah, like if you're trying to explore the Star Trek universe for the first time, I think yeah, you do need to have like an understanding of the original series. And I thought this was a way that made that very accessible. And it's also just a treat for, those of us who grew up with those characters and those stories, just, oh, this is so cool. We get to find out what happened to this one random character who appeared in one episode. And, we get to see like these beautiful consoles recreated and great HD CGI and, stuff like that. But Dave, what about you? What was kind of your general impression of this episode?
Sure. So yeah, I had a really good time with it. I'm going to bring up something outside of Trek fandom because not to in any way diminish it, but because it's a beloved property, Galaxy Quest.
Mhm.
That combination of sort of humor and heart and some meta commentary resonated with me, and for all the reasons I think Galaxy Quest Once Upon a Time resonated with Trek fandom, to the point where it's even now very often mentioned when people list their favorite Trek movies. And this had a different spin on it. It was, of course, but I liked how the episode used the fandom to address like what do you call it, imposter syndrome. I liked seeing the red shirts get their day, which is absolutely they were due. And I like stuff with like a play within a play. That's a very Shakespearean reference. The title of the episode, All the World's a Stage, is a Shakespearean reference. So a play within a show, within a TV show, was very much up my alley. I really enjoyed the mixture of comedy and heart in it, though, is the short version of it. Although seeing Murph sick was, even if he's just going through a metamorphosis, was also heartbreaking. And so we'll have to talk about that and address that very serious problem.
Cool. Well, Aaron H., what are your thoughts on this episode?
By the time we get to me, it's like everything's been said.
How'd you feel about the credits, Aaron?
Well, the typeface. No. No, it's funny, when I first watched this, I was basically live tweeting to Aaron. I didn't plan on doing that, and then I was just like, I just kept doing it. But no, there's something about it that's just, it's a show that I felt like I really needed right now, just because it was so positive. And just like I said, the meta commentary of sort of everyone going around in Starfleet uniforms. I'm like, that sounds familiar. And just the idea that you can do good without a spaceship, but also that can be applied to today. That you don't have to be in Starfleet to hold those ideals. And it's just, there were times where I teared up, where I'm just like, okay, it was just, especially like, and just the little callbacks when Uhura. It's like, you say her name basically.
I think it was
Pulse Power
or something like that.
Yeah, I kind of invented a naming convention of how this alien race names people. It's sort of like two consonants: Hoorah, James T, Scott E.
Yeah, sort of fantasy naming type conventions a little bit.
Yeah.
Drawn at least from that. Yeah.
T-pole, but in reverse.
Oh yeah. So when she, said pulse power and sort of impulse power, there's just something about that it was so sweet, and just like, I don't know, it really got me. And just to see them, and seeing Dal basically stepping up and now, like, give them a chance. He's sort of like, he's really growing as a character. And I over the last couple of weeks, I've really enjoyed seeing him step up.
Well, even in the episode, he went from early on a little bit of these guys don't realize what they're doing. They're just playing pretend, and we're just like them, and we all kind of suck. To let's give them a chance, like you said.
Right.
So that was a neat arc within the episode, obviously following his broader arc within the whole series.
I love when he shot up after being sick. And it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. That was fantastic.
Me neither, kid. Me neither.
Yeah. So that overall, I don't have a lot of comments about what I like. There's nothing I would change for sure.
Well, I want to talk with Aaron about the stuff on the Dauntless at the very beginning. A lot of people, I'm sure you've seen the reactions, but a lot of people are really excited to kind of check in with Admiral Janeway every week. And I know a lot of people out there are like, we want more Dauntless. We want more Admiral Janeway. We want to spend more time with this crew. We typically so far, like these new episodes coming out, I guess there's typically like 2 scenes on the Dauntless. Like this week there is only 1, so like I'm like, oh, like I need my Dauntless fix. I need to see what happens next. But yeah, I think one of the big draws of the show is, I love this idea of like Janeway coming after these kids and how, we understand where she's coming from, but it's kind of scary, someone like that is like mad at you or coming after you. So I'm really looking forward to the moment when they cross paths.
They've made mom mad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think just, I guess I can talk about, I don't want to interrupt the flow of your show, but I can talk a little bit about sort of the thrust of the Janeway storyline of, because we talked about a lot in these next 10 episodes of like, especially in Star Trek, but in any good show, an antagonist doesn't have to be a bad person. It can just be someone whose motives conflict with yours. And
sure,
two reference points that we kind of came to, and ironically, they're both sort of, one's a legal thriller, but one's a submarine movie, appropriately enough, which of course, so much of Star Trek is built around Navy and submarine combat. Where The Fugitive, where Tommy Lee Jones is just doing his job. Harrison Ford is trying to get away. You're kind of rooting for both of them in a way, but then in the end, you're kind of hoping they figure it out. And then the other one was that I referenced a lot in terms of structure, which I think is almost more appropriate, was The Hunt for Red October, which is, you're from Janeway's perspective, especially, she's just following this craft. At first, they think it's essentially a Soviet nuclear submarine that might be coming to America to bomb us. And then over the course of it, you're going to see the facts trickle in, and then you have that tension of what do I do with this information? But we had to start by stacking the deck against our crew a little bit and really build a case of why, based on the limited information she now has potentially 2 eyewitnesses of destroyed space station and somebody that may or may not say, hey, they pretended to be Starfleet refugees just long enough to blow up this station and then possibly kidnap the captain of the Protostar. Like it's not looking good for them right now.
Yeah, she even has the line of dialogue in this episode. This is no longer a rescue mission; it's a manhunt, or something along those lines, right? So
yeah, this is a little hint of Equinox Janeway. Of this is reprehensible to her that someone would use a starship in the Federation for conquest or for personal gain or to kill people. Like that's the opposite of what Starfleet represents.
She's going to call for a hard target search, Tommy Lee Jones style.
The whole idea of having, the 2 conflicting ideas being that's the conflict is so Star Trek too. It's just, it's not, we have to destroy this person because they're evil. There's no like not bipolar, but, it's, I don't know. It feels very, very much to the heart of what Star Trek is.
Right. It has that Star Trek nuance. It's not as black and white.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the Hegelian dialectic, to get philosophical, which is, you have the thesis and then the antithesis, but then ultimately the truth lies in the synthesis of the 2. And so that's kind of what we're doing with this season. We're just referencing Hegel.
We're getting deep now.
The kids love.
Deep. Kids love Hegel.
on a
I like Murph.
That needs to be a shirt. Kids love Hegel. No.
They love Murph though. That's who they really love. Like Aaron, you were there at Mission Chicago. I saw you there, but remember how like every little kid, when asked about Prodigy, they were all like, "Oh my god, I love Murph so much."
Yeah, and that's by design and intent. It worked.
Yeah. Mission accomplished there. And as a coffee fiend like Janeway, I'm literally drinking a cold brew coffee now at 7:30 at night. I am glad that she was allowed to have coffee again in this episode. She only has to switch to tea, I guess, sometimes. But
yeah, well, it might be decaf. She's part of the reason why she's on edge too, I think, is that she's had to reduce her caffeine consumption.
Yeah, I would murder Dr. Noam if he cut me off.
Well, who knows? Maybe it was the doctor who gave her that order before. It was like, you could go find Chakotay, but you need to cut back on your caffeine.
Is that what the diviner is drinking when we see him holding a cup in sick bay when they're questioning him? Like, does she give him coffee? Like, here, this will
I think
help
it's
you out.
water, isn't it?
I think it's water. In the script, it was coffee. She was that was like something Janeway gave him, just like wake up a little bit. But I think ultimately they decided to get for the reflection and to have that kind of cool moment and work better if it was water.
That's it. We find out that caffeine is poisonous to their people, and that's what like destroyed their society is coffee.
Oh yeah, the Protostar gave them caffeine. And
Father, you were putting yourself in Janeway's shoes and imagining enjoying coffee by proxy.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see where this is going to go with the diviner on the Dauntless. So obviously, Aaron, and have to keep it all secret, but. Yeah, good job, giving us a little bit of, I guess not stringing us along, but just, trickling enough information out slowly that we're hooked and want to keep coming back.
Yeah,
that's one thing that I think Prodigy's done very well.
Yeah, it's slow, but it's not too slow because they're trying to just. I remember thinking how the first episode could have gone. I was like, oh, we actually advanced quite a bit. And there was assumptions that people made smartly, which was nice compared to sometimes how television shows make characters feel stupid just so they can stretch something out or whatever instead of just writing differently.
Yeah, I think that there's, there's obviously different ways you can write stories. And sometimes you would stretch out a mystery really long. Sometimes you would have something that the audience knows that the characters don't, that sort of Hitchcockian bomb under the table sort of suspense sort of thing. But typically you don't want that to go on too long because then you start to get impatient. So that was kind of our thinking coming back, is like none of us were terribly interested in having Gwen not have lost all her memories and then the whole season is her regaining the things that the audience already knows. We kind of wanted to push that football forward.
Yeah, that was actually one of my fears going into that. So I was relieved when the episode 11 ended with 0. I remember everything.
Yeah. I think some people were surprised by that, but good, know.
Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about like the situation the Protostar is in now, where they're not able to go to the Federation, but they're still wanting to do good, do the Starfleet missions. So where exactly? I guess they were just going in like response to this distress call. But are they still like trying to move like towards the Federation? Or are they going in the opposite direction? Just trying to figure out like where are they in the galaxy, or where are they headed? Like what direction?
So if you're looking at a galactic map, which we used the stellar cartography, that was the most recent one that was edited by the amazing Larry Nemeczek. So if you look at the galactic map, there's sort of a stretch where the Federation borders kind of peek into the Beta Quadrant and kind of wrap around the Romulan neutral zone. And so if you just look at that map, they basically are right at the furthest. Episode 11 they were right at the furthest most edge, which is sort of like north of the top of the Romulan neutral zone, but south of the Delta Quadrant. And so basically, as soon as they found out, like, oh, we can't go to Federation right now because we're going to blow them up, they're kind of edging away, trying to reassess and figure out where they can go next. So they're kind of tooling around the Beta Quadrant right now.
Okay, so very close to the Romulan Star Empire.
Indeed.
Is there any way that you could give us a hint or a tease, or is it possible they might like come across some Romulans in the near future? If you can't say anything, that's fine.
I will say, indeed, they will come across some Romulans.
Wow,
that's awesome. Okay, y'all heard it here first.
Around the bush. By the way, Father, I just want to interrupt for just a second to say the still frame you've got up showing the Protostar in orbit around this planet. I just thought that was a particularly beautiful image. The animators did a really spectacular job in this episode as it was drifting around in orbit. Their colors are kind of similar. It's an icy blue and white. But I just thought it was a particularly cool orbital shot.
And what I like is it shows how deep some of these places are. So the shuttlecraft falling and falling and falling actually feels believable that you have time to fly in there and get them at that time. So the planet is almost like made up of a bunch of giant like
Olympus Mons Grand Canyon pits.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. Our art design team and visual development team is astonishing. They assembled an all-star team from around the world, literally people from every corner of the earth that met Benny Bond's very impressive standards, and they just kept out delivering every time. A lot of them came from video games too, because the video game artwork is really good these days.
Yeah, and character design is such a big part of that, which I'm sure we'll talk about as we continue through the episode. It's got to be a particular kind of pleasure, separate from live action, to see your script realized in animated designs.
Oh, absolutely! It's as close to magic, I think, as I experience every time.
Well, a lot of us are really concerned about sick Murph. So I know that we're getting the metamorphosis is what everyone's calling it online. But yeah, I'm a little worried. I'm like, oh, he's so cute and lovable now. Like, what's gonna happen to my Murph?
Yeah, it broke my heart writing this scene, because basically we, talking with the Hagemans, we were trying to figure out like what's the angle, and we were like, it's how do you feel when you have a sick pet and you don't know what to do? It's awful, and all you can do is just kind of like trust the process and hope they get better and keep them comfortable, and that's kind of what this scene was meant to do. I'm sorry for making people sad, but it is unfortunately my job to make you feel things.
Yes.
So,
No,
that has a little bit of like a feeling of yesteryear in some ways, but with a more positive outcome.
Yes, yesterday we did watch Yesteryear in the writers' room at one point. And we were like to rewatch it, I should say, and I was like, wow, they just pull zero punches in this.
Yeah. And Janeway is there as the voice, the mom-like voice, who's saying, "Hey, I think Murph is probably just going through something." So beyond the basic emotional tug of seeing any animal not feeling well, there is a little bit of voice of clarity there too.
I had never thought of this before, but she's an experienced pet owner. Because the real Janeway had a dog, so I'm sure that kind of got programmed into Hollow Janeway on some level.
Yeah, I mean, I'll confirm that here first, that she does in fact have plenty of memories about Molly, the Irish setter.
Oh.
And I'm not just saying that. You'll see that's canon.
Cool. Something else to look forward to.
So is the melanoid slime data not in the protostar, basically, so they wouldn't be able to look up what happens?
Well, I mean, I could get into that. I was going to save that for a tweet thread once we get.
Okay. Nope. Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead.
But let's just say that they are.
You've thought about it, put it that way.
They are mysterious species that are not. They're just sort of. Sort of like how this is real, by the way, in real science. For even now, until about like 5 years ago, we didn't know where eels came from. They just were like, we don't know where they spawn. We don't know what baby eels look like. They just didn't know until they found like one riverbed somewhere in Europe, I think. And so for the melanoid slime worm, we were sort of like, I think it's just sort of like they've seen them around, but they don't fully know everything about them yet.
I actually kind of like that even in a rather knowledgeable future that like Star Trek depicts, certainly some mysteries are good and drive the excitement.
Yeah, well, why else would you go out and explore and seek that new horizon?
Well, let's talk about this planet a little bit that they beamed down to. You said you had a lot of fun, creating the names of some of these characters, James T. Ensign, all of that. But I guess I've seen you talk on social media a little bit about how the proposed sequel to A Piece of the Action was going to be something DS9 wanted to do for the 30th anniversary. Instead, they did Trials and Tribulations, which is possibly my favorite episode of Star Trek ever. But there was an idea where they were like, oh, what if we go back to the Iosians, but they've just copied Starfleet after meeting Kirk and Spock.
Yeah, it was believe it or not, that was a happy accident. And that, like, I had maybe read about that and amidst the millions of troves of pages of Star Trek lore that I read in my spare time because I'm crazy. But I had completely forgotten about that. And the way we arrived at this was one of our staff writers, Yander Pendleton Thompson, who's a phenomenal writer, You know, as we were
she wrote last week's episode, right?
She did, yes, and she also wrote First Contact, and she was formerly a writer's assistant on Picard, and we were her first TV writing gig, and she's been wonderful. But so we occasionally have these sort of brainstorming sessions just to kind of keep it fresh, because you know the last thing we want to do is just sort of like at the beginning of a season just plan out all 20 episodes to the point where there's no discovery and no pleasant surprises and no creativity. So we had some sort of placeholder sections for like, oh, this could be an episode that tackles this part of their arc, but we haven't figured out what the theme of it is quite yet. And then so we had this blue sky period where we all just kind of wrote down a bunch of sort of log lines or story prompts, you know, not even fully fleshed out, just kind of like half ideas. And Deandra, she comes from a theatrical background, and she just came in and said, like, all the world's a stage. And then she's like, what if we just went to a planet and everybody there was just mysteriously acting out captain's logs? And that's all she had. And we were just sort of like, and I was like, well, first of all, the Shakespearean quote makes me think TOS. Like that's, you know, that is a Star Trek title if I've ever heard one. But then it sort of opened up this, got my gears grinding of like, well, how would that work? Are they mind controlled? What did they pick up subspace transmissions a la Contact? And then, you know, eventually we're like, actually, it might be a little cleaner if there's just someone who made First Contact, because, you know, in this pile of half ideas, we also had a pile of Star Trek concepts that we wanted to visit at some point. And one of them was cultural contamination episode, which obviously is more common in the TOS era than it is in other series, but it stuck with me because that was what some of the episodes that enthralled me the most when I was at my aunt's house. So I was like, I want to do a cultural contamination episode.
This kind of reminds me a little bit of Muse as well.
Yes, exactly. There's a little bit of Voyager, Muse. There's a little bit of the Royale. There's a little bit of I forget which episode it is, but I think there's like a DS9 episode that has a somewhat similar premise as well. That's not Trials and Tribulations, but I'll remember it later. But anyway, so that we were just like, oh, well, then what if somebody just made Contact, you know, like 100 years ago? And then, you know, I obviously brought up relics because I was like, well, they found a ship that was still in perfectly working order back then, from back then, that happened to have Scotty in it. And then it started to be like, well, what if it was actually like somebody from the Enterprise, because we're in the Beta Quadrant, and they obviously had a lot of stuff with the Romulans around then. And so then I think that eventually, this is over. I'm summarizing like an 8-hour conversation. Eventually, it got to the point where I was like, well, what if it was a red shirt? Because I was obsessed with red shirts, and I always felt like they got kind of a raw deal, and it was always sort of like charmingly weird that so many red shirts would die, and then Kirk would go, and then just kind of move on with the episode. And so I was like, well, what if a red shirt survived and he was the source of the cultural contamination? So then we got onto the list of, well, who should it be? And we were like, well, we could make someone up, but that doesn't seem very sporting. It's like, well, which red shirts are there that had sort of a prominent role and survived? And we realized there weren't very many at all. And one of them was Garavik. And I was like, oh, interesting, from Obsession. And then we kind of revisited the episode of Obsession and realized that his story in that mirrors our own character story of that sort of self-doubt and am I good enough to be Starfleet? You know, I've messed up. Can I redeem myself? And it became this perfect storm of like, well, now we have to do this episode. And then nobody else wanted to touch it because it was so like wheels within wheels, layers upon layers. And I was like, I see it perfectly. I'll just do it.
Well, our friend Starfleet Boy is in our live audience, and he wanted you to know that you killed his husband, but he loves the way that you killed him, is what he said. But yeah, he was a big fan of Garavik and that episode, Obsession. He also wants to know, like, does Garavik have a first name?
Well, I think it's David. I think you see that in a log somewhere, maybe. Not in our show, but in
Obsession.
Somewhere, someone calls him David, I think. maybe not in the episode, and maybe that's why there's controversy over whether he has a first name. But no, I mean, I love Garavik too, because I wanted to know what happened to him, because by the end of the episode Obsession, it seems like Kirk and he have like not only a history but like a relationship, and you're ready for him to like sit down next to Chekhov and like join the bridge crew, and then he's just never seen again, and then he's never mentioned again. And I was like, well, surely we can give him and by proxy all red shirts a little bit more of fanfare and sort of like something to really honor the role that they play in Starfleet. And that was kind of why we went with him, not only just because he was a red shirt, but because he was a great character that kind of disappeared due to the nature of episodic television.
Well, very nice. And yeah, it is a deep cut. When I was watching the episode the first time, I was like, Garavik. I know that was a name from the original series, but like, what episode? I did think it might have been Obsession, but I had to double check Memory Alpha. And I'm normally like very familiar with the original series. That's one of the Star Trek shows I know the most well. It might be the one I know the most well because I've just seen it so many times. Yeah, so the fact that I was like, okay, that's familiar, but I still have to like go double check. I think that's kind of cool. It was like, yeah, that's like a real good deep cut there.
Yeah, and I tried to structure the episode where you don't have to know that he was from TOS, but if you did, it would add another layer to it that was thematically appropriate.
Yeah, and if he had been like an original character, it would have worked fine.
Yeah, but people would have been so mad if I killed off one of the bridge crew.
I suppose it works, in some ways it works particularly well if people don't know him, because the nameless red shirt is the tradition that they come from. And so if you're tributing them, in a way it helps if you don't know who this particular one is.
Sure, yeah.
No,
either nameless or forgettable.
Yeah, and that's what my thought was. Like, it's sort of, in a way, my own version of a lower decks episode, either TNG or the series, where it's like the rest of the crew have their own stories to tell.
Well, I'd like to ask you a little like behind the scenes information on just kind of the world here that the Enterprisians live on. They're able to, I guess, pass down all this information through like a limited amount of technology that they have, and also just a tradition of oral storytelling. Mm-hmm. What exactly are they doing when they're reviewing these logs? They obviously have like video captured and some type of screen to display it on. So can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so in my imagination, 114 years ago, or however long the exact date would be, that Garavik, went back to the shuttle on several trips, each time, exposing himself to a little bit of danger stuff, trying to salvage what he could from the wreck. And then when it became clear the Enterprise wasn't coming back, and he didn't have the tools to stop the danger of the Galileo, he made a choice to basically try to teach these people the way of Starfleet, essentially gambling and hoping that they would progress enough that they could eventually solve this problem that he knew that he would not be around long enough to fix. And so I think he brought them some of this Starfleet tech, and they were able to reverse engineer it into creating some like log screens and stuff, so that they could at least the important stuff, for instance, like how to operate a console and stuff, that Garavik presumably walked them through, maybe with a half-burned manual that was there in the shuttle that he was able to salvage. And so that way, once they had reverse engineered video capture and TV screens and stuff, then they would be able to pass that important information along, alongside what is probably a more important cultural thing, as you say, the oral storytelling and creating these sort of hero myths to pass along the spiritual information they felt was the most important to understanding, what came before. At least that's my headcanon.
It makes me think a little bit about the Futurama Star Trek episode, where Star Trek had kind of become like they're doing it for comedy and kind of satire, but Star Trek in the future of Futurama eventually becomes a religion.
Yes. Written by David Goodman, another fantastic Star Trek writer,
who I think worked on the Orville as well, right? Or no, I'm thinking of someone else.
He did. He said, I believe, an executive producer on the Orville as well.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot that he had written that episode of Futurama, but yeah, this is kind of a similar idea, but played more seriously. But yeah, it was a neat thing, and just the idea of like these people that, you know, they put on like these plays and stuff and like do these recreations.
Space acting.
Yeah, it's a lot like fan films. You know, like, you know, it's kind of like watching Star Trek Continues or something. But Aaron, you have experience. Dude, Aaron Harvey, I got to specify which Aaron I'm talking to.
Oh.
Aaron, you have experience, I guess, you know, recreating Starfleet on stage like this with your improv shows.
Yeah, we even had, I don't remember what it is off the top of my head. We had like a one direction that everybody went if there was a, so we all knew in advance which way to lean and go back and forth. So we were all coordinated no matter what was happening. Whenever there was some sort of like explosion or whatever, we'd all wrench to the left or whatever. I think it was left. So yeah, so that was
amazing.
Fun.
Yeah, I was, you know, I've never done anything quite like that, but I did do high school theater. And I was in a production of The Music Man, if there's any theater majors or fans. But if you recall, I was in the opening scene. There's I think it's called Rock Island Station, where there's a whole play where you're supposed to, or opening scene to the play, where there are a bunch of people on a train, and you're supposed to mimic the train speeding up, and then suddenly you're on the rails, and you basically have to be your own metronome. So I whenever I saw Star Trek actors like trying to coordinate those rocks, I felt that in my bones. And I was so glad that I got to work it
your boons.
Into my boons.
Yeah, Will Wheaton says that is the one universal thing that every Star Trek actor, no matter what show they were on, what ship they served on, he says he can go up to any Star Trek actor and talk about, yeah, like, you know, when you have to like shake and pretend that like the ship's getting hit and stuff. It's like all of them are like, yeah, I remember having to learn how to do that.
They called it space acting on a couple of the videos that I saw where they were interviewing them.
Space acting.
Why, but space acting.
It's funny when people sometimes, you know, get a little, I'm going to say, too granular and looking for logic in Trek. Sometimes I think they'll be like, you know, why aren't there more seatbelts? Why aren't there more precautions? But I'm like, do you really want to strip away this very fun, classic narrative visual, you know, shorthand?
There are still seatbelts in TAS, and it still works.
Right? Yeah, it's a visual shorthand. It's exciting. It's a tradition too, somewhat in Trek. You know, like don't try and buzzkill that. That's good times.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, for better or for worse, this episode is sort of a celebration of some of those really weird traditions that are beloved because they are those sort of like outliers that the logic maybe tracks, but you just have to kind of go with it because like Piece of the Action is a crazy idea for an episode of television, but it's beloved because you want to see Spock with a Tommy gun. And
yeah, I totally want to see that.
So since Dr. Boons has come up, I did. It's later, and it's, you know, it's the tail end of the episode or last third maybe, but I liked that he got his moment of wisdom, and you kind of recognize at that point, if you had been sort of conceiving of these people, the Enterpriseians, as somewhat, you know, quote unquote primitive, that this guy has serious wisdom. It's not just, you know, it's a not play. That they do understand technology. We'll see more of that too, and they're much more sophisticated than they seemed on the surface. And so I like how that kind of came out. I felt like, especially through him, but it would, you know, ultimately come out through a lot of the characters.
Yeah, and I think that was, you know, whether you want to talk about sort of communities and society and how we always have a tendency to judge the other as, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, they're wrong, or in fandom, I think it's hard to get away from that in this episode of like, there's always this assumption of like, oh, they're silly, they don't know truly what they're doing, they don't know what you know, how to be Starfleet the right way. And then in the end, I think I was just trying to strip it down to its bare essentials. Like Starfleet contains multitudes, you know, infinite diversity and infinite combinations, and it's that multitude that makes us woven together into an incredibly strong tapestry, and in fact, I feel like Star Trek fandoms and Star Trek's greatest strength. And so that you're absolutely right that there was sort of supposed to be a little bit of like presumptions that then get completely dissolved and flipped on their head by the end of it, when in fact those very people that you were judging are the ones that you have to embrace, and then you realize we're all part of the same cloth.
Yeah, the scene with Dr. Boones is kind of what made the episode work for me. I was a little, kind of worried at the beginning, like, is this kind of like, making fun of the original series or whatever. But then, when he has that explanation to Dal, where he's just like, yeah, like we know we're not the real Starfleet or Starflight, as he called it. But the way that they explain that, he's like, yeah, like we're smart, but yeah, we obviously know like the knowledge we have is incomplete. That's the word he uses, like incomplete. Like, we're intelligent, we figure things out, but yeah, there's just a lot of stuff like, we don't know, or like that we don't have, but we're just trying to do the best we can with these Starfleet morals and values that were taught to us. And I know people in real life who like they kind of base their own morality off of the Star Trek values, and that it definitely reminded me of that. And the documentary Trekkies had the woman in Arkansas who I assume people have seen like the documentary, but there's like the woman on the jury in Arkansas that President Clinton either had to show up to testify or was possibly going to show up to testify. And she was like going to court in her Starfleet uniform. And, a lot of people like, were making fun of her and gave her a hard time about that. But she was just saying like, but this is what I kind of based a lot of my life and my morality and stuff on. And she was involved in like real life organizations that tried to aspire to the values of Starfleet. Kind of did like the same thing, like we know that we're not actually exploring the universe, but we just want to dress up in these uniforms because it makes us feel like these heroes that do good, and we want to do good like them.
And that's, I think that when you get down to it, the purpose of all sort of monomyths and storytelling is like, you watch Marvel movies or read Beowulf, not because that you can defeat a dragon, but that you can emulate their bravery in the face of the unknown. You can stand up for what's right in the face of injustice, and it becomes a metaphor for your life. It became a metaphor for my life. And there have been numerous occasions where it'd be easy just to kind of do the Ferengi thing, but instead I decide to be, try to be my better self and just try to put my best foot forward and realize that, everybody kind of comes from their own organizing principles, their own background, their own culture, but we also share humanity. And that's honestly guided me through a lot of really difficult times. And very much sort of like, because I get made fun of sometimes, like, oh, you're a nerd. But I'm like, sure. But I feel like I have a wider understanding of other people because of my willingness to embrace, science fiction, but also, other fans and other people in ways I never would have thought before. And so that's kind of what this scene was grasping at, is like, you never know what the other person's going through. But we all are trying our best with what we have. And I think that resonated with Dal and seems to resonate with a lot of people who've seen the episode too.
Yeah, and the way that, he kind of is experiencing a form of imposter syndrome, like, what are we doing? Wearing these uniforms we didn't earn, flying around on the ship that doesn't really belong to us, like trying to act like Starfleet. We're as ridiculous as these people on this planet. But the episode was really cool in that it gave him opportunity to come to terms with that while telling this fun story.
What I liked is that I get the impression broadly that the Enterprisians, had they never been visited by Garavik, would broadly still be a good and industrious and helpful people. But his the presence of Starfleet in their life gave them a sort of focus, gave them something that they romanticized and threw themselves into and got joy from, and it inspired their art and all these things too. But I like that sense, that they kind of, I think they knew that it inspired them. They gravitated to it knowing that it was maybe subconsciously, knowing it was only refining what the decent people that they already were. I think that's kind of a neat way to see fandoms and things like that, is that you can kind of choose them and use them to kind of galvanize what's already some essentially good things in yourself.
Yeah. And I think a flip side of it is, it's about faith in institutions and whether you feel like you belong in them. And they're like anything. There's some people that wholeheartedly believe in those institutions or organizations, and then there's other people that realize, like perhaps Dr. Boone's, that they're only as strong as the people that comprise them. And you have to protect their ideals in order for them to survive and thrive, whether it's a fandom or democracy or faith or what have you. Like there are underpinnings to how we interact with each other. And maybe it's too deep for a kids show, but I wanted to try to go there.
No, I think Star Trek has a tradition of having those deeper layers. That's kind of the beauty, for those of us who grew up with it. I think, yeah, when we're kids, it's like, oh, spaceships, dancing Orion women's, that's cool. But then, as we get like a little older, we start, you can peel back more. Aaron Harvey, I've heard you talk about this before, about like the appeal that Star Trek had to you, where that some other Star franchises didn't, is that it does have that depth, and like the more you mature, like the more deeper stuff you can pull out of it, or the more cerebral stuff you can pull out of it.
You grow with it, or it grows with you, as opposed to growing out of something. Almost, it feels like you're like, okay, you're in your 30s, your 40s, you're still finding something interesting, and like and where other things you might have just like, oh, okay, it's still fun to watch, but it's not giving me any kind of deep emotional meaning or anything like that. But yeah,
sure,
and you can still
like even the animated
series,
ships, which I know is yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I say even the animated series, which you watch as a little kid, and you still get something out of it. But then when you watch it as an adult, like we were saying with Yesteryear, you're just like, wow, there's a lot of real emotion there, and just good storytelling.
Yeah, and this show, I jokingly call it a kids show, but from the beginning, we always just kind of wrote it as a show for everybody. If anything, it's a family show. It's a show that young people can watch with their parents or their grandparents, and everybody gets something out of it. That was always our goal. It was marketed as a kids show, but we always were like, this is a show in our mind is sort of what they call 4-quadrant, which I know is a huge Trek fun. But young, old, men, women, everybody in between can get something out of the show and hopefully watch it together. That was always our intent.
It sounds like what Dorothy basically talked about for TAS. It's not a kiddie show. It's it's Star Trek in animation form.
Yeah, and we had one of her scripts signed, I think, by Nichelle Nichols, actually, in our offices, as sort of a reminder of that.
Oh, nice.
Oh, cool. What episode do you remember?
I have a picture, but it's been a while since I've been in the office, so but I'll tweet it later.
Cool.
Yeah,
that was a thing that was important to Gene too, back when they were doing the animated series. Yeah, there was a proposed animated series, I guess, while TOS was still on the air, right? That would have been a lot more childish and goofy, and there would have been a Vulcan boy named Steve. I
still think that was a placeholder name, and they wouldn't have used that. But yes,
okay. I mean, you can have an Andorian named Jennifer. It's fine.
Well, that's true.
Well, yeah, that's true. You mentioned Beowulf a moment ago. Was that an inspiration for the the face the gallows the beast that has killed everyone, but these brave heroes will step out and try to be the ones to save this little village of people?
Yeah, I'm sort of a classicist in that I do draw a lot of inspiration from sort of older works. Beowulf is one that is sort of tattooed on my brain. But I think that I'm in good company, because I think Gene Roddenberry did that a lot as well. So many of TOS's episodes, at least in some broad sense, were kind of like either taking off of classic cultures or classic stories. There's so many episodes of TOS where they have to venture into a mountain and confront what is the god being, and it's actually just a computer. So that was very much kind of trying to evoke that venture into the unknown, have the meeting with the goddess, face the dark beast, and then come out of it having changed. Very hero's journey, Joseph Campbell type stuff.
Well, I really liked how the gallows was teased during the play, when they have like the fake glowing red eyes, and I see that. I'm kind of thinking in the back of my head, like, okay, that'll be something they encounter later within the episode. And then when they go into the cavern and there are those two glowing red orbs, Somehow it's kind of like clicking in my brain, like, oh, those are like the proportions of a TOS shuttlecraft. And I was thinking like Galileo. And it was like that cool moment where like I figured out the reveal like right when it happened in the episode, which Dave,
Nice.
you talk about a lot. That's like the most satisfying way to experience, because you get like the thrill of figuring it out, but you didn't figure it out too early.
There's a screenwriter, and I don't remember if it's William Goldman or whatever, but he does the let the audience figure out the 2 + 2 is 4 thing, and they'll always love you for it. I forget who. Maybe Aaron, you might know.
That sounds like a William Goldman quote if I ever heard one. That sounds.
It seems like him. Yeah, it's like if you spell it out, then that's kind of lame. If you let the audience figure it out, it's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I heard a few people say, "Oh, I figured it out," but then I kind of forgot about it. But I've been pleasantly surprised by so many people that didn't quite figure it out until just moments before, she shines the light and says, "Not Gallows, Galileo." And,
I didn't figure out the name, but the little lights, I'm like, nacelles, that feels very much like nacelles. I'm like, but then I kind of forgot about it. So
yeah, it's and there aren't that many shots of the shuttle being used in Star Trek, and it seems to change a little bit of how they light it and stuff between. So what I wound up doing was I found a model that someone had created of like if the everything was working properly, this is what it would look like, and they had the two nacelles lighting up, and I sent that to our directors, like, just do this but have it through a haze. And then Andrew Schmidt, who I worked with on Tales of Arcadia, he's a phenomenal director, and he instantly knew what I was talking about. And anytime he had a question about anything, he'd always like just go directly to me and say, "What do you think?" And so we kind of conspired a lot of trying to get this. I think he even was the one who, I think it was him, it's been a little while, where he said like, "Oh, I was looking up messed up shuttlecraft and I found the original Galileo was found in a junkyard and it looked like this, and the door was off." And then it's like, what if we did that? And I was like, perfect. And I was
literally looking at those pictures yesterday. That's
yeah. But I was very happy
now,
with how this
and
came out.
It's been restored and is, I want to say it's either in the tour or it's somewhere that you can get to it.
They had it down here in Texas for a while, in Houston at the NASA Space Center, but I think now it's going up to Ticonderoga.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Star Trek set tours up there. I might be wrong on that, so don't quote me on that. But I think it has gone somewhere else. It has a new home now, or is about to have one.
Am I correct? It's kind of left as a mystery exactly how it is the Galileo got out there, or we know it was on a mission, but
yeah, I think part of the fun of this sort of mystery was like you have clues, but they're kind of through a game of telephone. There was a mission, but then all you have are this sort of like the facts become whispers, become sort of legends, become mythology. And so you can kind of, it's almost like an anthropological study to try to figure out what the myth was referring to. I certainly have a whole headcanon of, that Garavik was on some sort of test flight or just routine mission that he volunteered to take solo just to do some routine thing. But then a classic Trek anomaly sends his ship veering off course. It gets lost in an ionic storm of some sort. The sensors lose track of him. The ship crashes. He tries to steer it away from the village, trying to preserve the prime directive, but lands in this dilithium cave that he didn't know was there. It creates this big subspatial distortion. The Enterprise flies by, does the scans. They can find no signs of it. They find nothing but dust and debris, as Spock would probably say. And unfortunately, they just have to maybe they even kind of beamed down outside the area. Couldn't, their sensors couldn't get a lock, and they're like, the shuttle's been lost, and so has Garavik. A heartbroken Kirk has to move on, but in honor of his who was going to be sitting next to Chekhov, he was about to get his promotion. He decides to rename the Galileo instead of just having the Galileo. He's like, no, that's retired. It's now the Galileo 2 in honor of my best friend David Garavik. And And then from there on out is the story that Kirk and crew didn't know happened, which is that Garrovick survived and then was in this sort of conundrum where, if he truly adhered to the Prime Directive, these people that healed him and helped him would be doomed to die from this poisoning of the land. And so he made the choice to sort of bend the rules in truly James T. Kirk fashion, the Apple style, and find a way to try to save them by giving them everything that he could before he succumbed to his wounds. So that's my backstory. I don't know if that ruins the mystique of it, but
no, that's cool. That's cool. I like that. At least you like put the thought into that to like make sure it could work, even if it doesn't necessarily happen like that. Like we don't know. It's still like a little mysterious. It's like, well,
right. It's its own lost episode.
Yeah.
I think you at least get the important stuff, which is that something happened where he was lost. The Enterprise had to move on, as they do with red shirts regularly, but also they even do it. I think in Galileo 7, after they scan and they can't find them, there's a period where they're like, we have to leave, like, Scotty and Spock are gone, and that's why Spock does that last ditch kind of effort to launch the ship up and shoot out a flare, basically to let them know they're still alive, because that's just Starfleet protocol at that time. You can only spend so much time looking for the lost.
We need.
I think you and I were talking about how that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, we need to pitch that story to IDW as a like, it'd be like a little one-shot comic. Aaron Harvey, you can do the cover. Aaron Waltke, you can write it.
Here's some background information. Dayton Ward did pitch that. Wanted it when he first read the script in 2019, I think, or something. Yeah. He said that he wanted to do that backstory, and it just sort of went into like a hole.
Oh, well, maybe now that it's out,
they're not going to. Yeah, exactly. I think back then it's like, well, nobody's going to know what this is for years.
Man, that would be so cool.
Yeah, what that? Dave, you manage a comic store, so you'll be the one selling it. Yeah, I'm not gonna do any. I'll just talk about it online. I'll just set up the Tex-Trek podcast / stream where we talk about it. So yeah, we will have something to do.
I would love to write that one shot, actually. I'll have to hit up Dayton and see if maybe we can resuscitate that. Because I feel like now that it's out and the fan reaction has been what it is, I think there's a good case to be made.
I do want to cover them.
I agree.
Yeah. You and I were talking earlier, too, or how it was possibly, like, chronologically, it kind of fits in the TAS era because it's after, and also we don't have any mention of Chekhov.
Yeah, no Chekhov reference.
And that's when he was gone out of TAS. So
well, there was also there were so many things. The play originally was like 2 pages longer. It was just basically this whole episode.
I love his dramatic dying.
Yes.
Oh man,
these are my dying words.
The falling through space on the over the starfield was there's just a ton of course great visuals throughout the whole play.
Insan fell from the stars, bearing gifts of knowledge.
I love Jenkins was like, "Who's this guy?" That was great. Like somehow he knew what the other people.
Which is like that is like a reaction to the red shirts. But speaking of great visuals, I got a big thrill when I saw the TOS sets recreated on the Protostar bridge.
Yeah.
Was that your idea?
I mean, of course it was. Yes.
All his episodes are required to have a TOS bridge recreation.
Yeah. I'll stop putting Enterprise's bridges in my script someday, but not now.
Yeah, because you've given us the Enterprise D bridge. You gave us the original Connie bridge again.
Yeah, so I have a problem. I admit it.
Yeah, I wonder what's next. This also made me think of the VR game Star Trek Bridge Crew, because you can change that. You can make it be like the J.J. Kelvin bridge, where you can make it be the original series. You can make it be Next Generation, but like you can just kind of switch to whichever one you want to play on. So it's kind of like that.
Yeah, well, moments like this are some of my favorite moments in storytelling, where you have sort of 3 problems in need of a solution, and suddenly you find that perfect answer that actually is not only the correct answer, but enhances the moment, makes it feel like it was supposed to be that all along. And one of them was I really wanted to do sort of what was the name of that TNG episode? Who Watches the Watchers? Is that where Picard brings, the contaminated people up to the bridge to explain how ships work. These people already know how ships work, and they know what Starfleet is and everything, and seem to maybe know how to fly a ship based on Dal's clocking them, pushing the buttons and stuff. But the issue is like, how would they know how to fly a 24th century ship? Even if they're like sort of the Jesse Pinkman to Garavic's, Walter White, where they know how to, at least by rote memorization, what buttons to push to do the maneuvers. That's not what the protostar looks like. But then there's also then I was like, well, what if it was sort of a holographic display of some sort? And then we're like, what if we recreated the actual bridge on the Enterprise? And they're like, can it do that? And I said, yes, because the holo emitters are throughout the ship post Voyager.
Yep.
We have that for holographic beings now, and so that I would arguably, this is probably straining what the holo emitters can do outside the holodeck, but
no, this is the protostar. It's got probably better.
That's too fun of an idea to not do it. And it gives these characters like the big payoff. Like they get the opportunity to go, they've been cosplayers all their life, and now you get to do it for real.
I kind of, when I was watching that, I think that was one of the scenes where I kind of teared up a little bit watching it. It was really, really an emotional moment to give them their shot.
Yeah, every Star Trek fan wants to do that. We all want to beam up to a ship and, sit down at the controls and do Starfleet stuff.
And I think what this moment for me is what made the whole episode work when we were breaking it. Because I was like, it's not just about like, I feel better about myself. It's like you now have to put that faith into practice and put your belief in other people to the test. And in this sort of life or death moment, like in a true Kirk fashion, he has to make an out of the box call and just say, well, it's either we try something or we lose our friends. And he decides that to give them that opportunity just in that moment. And to his surprise, they're even better than he expected. And like basically him overcoming that sort of accidental prejudice is the very thing that unlocks, all of their salvation. And I'm like, that's Star Trek to me. And then I think as that was kind of lying in, I was like, how do we drive that forward? And I was like, what if we finally hear Garavic's log? And then you find out that was and you get to hear in his own voices, you've unlocked the final key in this temple. Now you get to see the prize of what really happened and how he came to the same conclusion. And, well done, noble adventurer. That gets me every time.
Yeah, no, I think it's just a combination of things, like hearing that voiceover, which was Fred Tatasciore. Yeah, he's Shax on Lord.
Yeah, and I worked with Fred, and I had worked with Fred very extensively because he's the voice of Arg in Troll Hunters and Tales of Arcadia, and so which is one of the main characters on that show. And so when they were like, well, maybe Fred could do it, I say, oh, he could absolutely do it. He's one of the greatest voice actors alive and working today.
Did he do Dr. Boons as well?
He did. He's also the voice of the Hulk and a bunch of other stuff. Like he has that gravitas, and he's like just a genuinely good actor. He has a very baritone voice, so he tends to get cast in those roles. But he has a lot of nuance that he really brings to all of his performances.
Yeah, it was a really good combination of his performance doing the voice, also the dialogue that you wrote for him, the visuals of the TOS bridge, the climax of the story, like rescuing the kids that are on the shuttle, these characters that have been lifelong Starfleet wannabes finally getting to prove they can be the real deal, and then Dog, coming to terms with his imposter syndrome issues, just all of that happening at the same time. And then Nami's score was particularly good at this moment. But these last few episodes, I've noticed like the score has just really been knocking it out of the park. So kudos to her and the work she's doing.
We're extremely lucky that we got Nami before she became what she is now. And
yeah, she scores Marvel movies now. She scored Thor.
Yeah, well, Michael Giacchino basically said, hey, if you're looking for a composer, you should use Nami. I've worked with her. She's fantastic. I've sort of her mentor in the Hollywood scene. And we're like, okay, Michael Giacchino, if you say so. And yeah, she was fantastic. She's been wonderful.
Awesome.
I think the combination of all the different storytelling elements and just the Trekness of everything makes it also not feel like a wallow in nostalgia. It's nostalgic, but it's not. It doesn't feel. It feels like it's earned. It doesn't feel cheap, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think it was
because if you just heard this without knowing the context, it could be like, oh, they're doing the TOS episode, okay, or whatever.
Right.
But it's not.
Yeah, I think from the beginning, whenever we have any sort of venture into something that is very nostalgic or legacy, we don't want it just to be for the excitement in your brain of like, I recognize that. We want it to be. We want to evoke the meaning behind it, why it's nostalgic, why it became important to people, and what it means to our heroes, and it needs to have an impact to their journey as well. And so I'm glad as complex and as this episode was, we were able to like really kind of say this is why people like this jet age Star Trek show with flimsy cardboard sets. It's not about what you're seeing on the screen, it's about what it represents. And so I'm glad that people kind of picked up on that.
You're talking about the Trekness of it. Something else in the episode, they reiterated something that was, I think, sort of in the closing of the previous episode when they were like,
I'm sorry,
Dave's hologram has frozen.
Yeah, it's that subspace interference from the leaking warp engine. It did to him what Janeway said.
We're not going to be able to.
He's back.
There you go.
Am I back?
Yeah, we lost you for a moment.
Yeah, I'm Mirror Dave now. Just a heads up. I'm
evil. Well, we're flying through the Chimerian cave right now in the imagery, so it actually works.
Yeah,
that's perfect. Sorry. I don't know where that got left off, but I was just going to reiterate, talking about the Trekness of it, that Dal and his crew deciding to do Starfleet stuff without the prize dangled at the end of being able to join Starfleet, knowing that's not really possible right now, maybe never. That is also a very Trekky thing, and another one of those, like the end of I guess it both began with that in the episode, and then it ends with some very Starfleet philosophy. So it was, a more earned, I think, earned Trekkiness, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's kind of been the journey for our heroes, and what this sort of period of their journey of this season is like. It's not about just wanting to get to Starfleet because you'll have a better life. It's about embodying what it is, so that way when you arrive, you belong. And so them sort of realizing that they can do that anywhere here, even though they still want to go where they feel like they could be. It's a fun little kind of undercutting and subversion of that sort of there's no place like home kind of vibe.
I thought there was no harder hand signal to do than the Vulcan salute, but I have found one. It is the wrong Vulcan salute. I can't make my fingers do it.
I think my brother used to do this trick where he would move between them, and so I practiced it a lot as a kid, and I can kind of do it.
I'm quite good at it, but I'm a freak, so I get it.
For anybody who's listening to this on audio, we're all on screen trying to make our hands go between the right and wrong ones and looking like a bunch of doofuses.
Yeah, I really have to think way too hard. I can do both of them, but I really have to like strain my brain to think about it.
There you go.
Yeah, that's cool.
Incidentally, I would buy a T-shirt that had like that symbol on it, and one of the many memorable broken phrases from the episode or misremembered.
The episode.
There might be a T-shirt coming towards Aaron's way for the design that I did on the poster.
Oh, cool.
I would be interested.
The episode ends with that montage that kind of wraps everything up and shows that the rules on second contact are a little fuzzy, but we can kind of help them out a little bit, give them some medical supplies, teach them the right Vulcan hand drives, give them some new stories to add to their plays that they perform. But the thing that I see a lot of people talk about is like the rules about second contact are a bit fuzzy. That must be a Lower Decks reference. But I was thinking like, no, like this episode was probably written like before that show was a thing. So I don't know. Can you shed some light on that?
So it was written, I think Lower Decks was in production on their first season, but I don't think they had released anything yet to the public. So we knew that they were doing second contact stuff, but it was very early days. But I also, just in general, the rules of second contact are fuzzy. So
sure.
I think when I wrote that line, I was like, I have to acknowledge that they are in kind of a weird space that probably Starfleet hasn't necessarily been in before, where they have some people that they know about starships. They have a subspace communicator, which is one of the things that allows you to make first contact. Lots of people say, oh, they have to have warp drive. No, it can actually be a subspace communication as well. The point is you're at a point where you can start to make contact with alien races. So they're sort of in this, like, on a scale of on the, what do you call that? The Zephram Cochrane scale of first contacts. They're somewhere like teetering over 50%. So I was like, you know what? They're not even Starfleet in the traditional sense themselves. So at the very least, I think they could probably help clean up the mess that Starfleet made on the planet, which is pretty common. And they went down assuming that they were warp capable, or at least capable of communicating with other alien races. So the cat's out of the bag there. It's not like they have a Men in Black like memory eraser gun or something.
Yeah. I mean, Dr. Crusher had that ability. She used that very liberally.
Yeah. But I don't think Zero's medical skills in this episode are quite up to snuff to erase people's minds.
Well, he could just show himself, and then everybody's memory would be gone.
Yeah. Well, that worked okay for Vaunacott, but I don't know if we want to try that on any Enterprisians.
Yeah. Speaking of Zero, though, when the show first started, I kind of assumed he was going to be the helmsman or the navigator on the ship, but late. Sorry,
they were going to be right.
Or yeah, I'm sorry, like Zero. I thought they were going to be the navigator, being a Medusan, or like the helmsman or something. But in a lot of recent episodes, they've been doing more medical stuff. So I am assuming now that that's going to be their path, is towards like being the Starfleet doctor of Prodigy.
Well, yeah. So we kind of modeled, because we have such a small crew, we kind of modeled this on the old Star Trek trope of a lot of characters doing double duty. It's why do you have the person who's in charge of just steering the ship going on away missions? Well, because you want to see them on the planet, but also in Voyager, for instance, like they were down medical personnel, so that Tom Paris was both the helmsman, or the con officer, and he also worked in sickbay with the doctor. So our thought was like, I think it's more than forgivable and understandable on a crew of 5 to have them kind of have specialties, but also do other stuff on the ship as well.
That's been my theory from the very first episode, that Murph will eventually be the security or tactical officer, because he was the one, when they couldn't find the pew 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 button, he was the one who found it.
Oh.
So it certainly helps that Murph is indestructible. Yeah. He's a red shirt that can't die.
But I guess the final shot of the episode was Rock Talk looking at the cocooned Murph. So another big tease to get us to come back next week and see what happens to Murph. I know a lot of people online have a lot of curiosity and some fear, a little bit of fear. What's going to happen to cute Murph?
They're on Murph watch. I get it. Well, I mean, I'll say this. Murph is indestructible. We've established that. Murph goes through changes. We all go through changes. But come on, Murph's always going to be cute. Let's be real.
Well, good to know.
Right there, it sort of looks like it's got like a 1990s toy vibe for some reason, like that gradation, and like feels like it's a plastic thing or something. I don't know why.
Yeah, well, I mean, we keep saying they need to make Murph Gak. It's Nickelodeon, like it's right there.
Yeah.
Gak. I haven't thought of that since like 1994, but yeah, like that'd be
Murph's
perfect.
At least sell these.
Murph's particular color gradations and have always been particularly visually appealing. So yeah, slap that on some gack.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this episode with us, Aaron. Hope to have you back on the show at some other point in the future, maybe if we can swing that. We always end our shows with this section we call the gourd eggs, where I talk about the Easter eggs, in jokes, and continuity connections I found within the episode that I thought were worth bringing up. The first one, I guess the title of the episode itself is a Shakespeare reference.
Yeah, it's from As You Like It. All the world's a stage. The men and women merely players. They have their entrances and their exits. And then something, 7 stages of man.
I always like hearing the slightly longer versions because Shakespeare, when he's shortened, you can lose a lot of the meaning. But yeah,
yeah, and that was definitely referring when as we kind of talked through it, like obviously that comings and goings and the legacies you leave behind were very much part of this. So
nice.
Correct. Sorry, I didn't mean it. I'm slowing down your memento on the gourd eggs. I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. We want your input. I guarantee you, everyone listening to this would rather hear from you than hear from me. So.
I always derail Fathery during these things anyway. Like, oh yeah,
yeah, I'm used to it.
Then...
But of the original series, I guess visuals that we saw recreated, which we haven't really gotten since I guess 2005 with In a Mirror Darkly on Star Trek Enterprise, where they went to a 2260s Constitution class starship. But yeah, here we have like not only the visuals of the bridge of the Enterprise, but also the phasers, communicators, and uniforms are all seen in action throughout the episode. So that was cool to see those props. And Playmates is making these phasers again, so a bit of a commercial for that licensed product. And the thing that like I really like, made me a little nervous the first time I was watching it, but then by the time I saw the end of the episode and realized what you were doing, it's like, oh, okay, that actually was like a great addition to have in there. But the martial arts that they're practicing were Kirk Fu, which Dayton Ward has the Kirk Fu book also available now. So.
Yes, that was my insistence. I was like, they have to be. I wrote it into the episode, and I was like, don't forget the Kirk Fu. And the director's like, I know.
Yeah, what I love about these uniforms is the women have a cut in, and men have like a cut out, like it's interesting little knob on the end, and then of course all the women have braids as opposed to them actually meaning command of any kind.
Yeah. The story behind that was just, I think, the idea that. Garavik was going over the essentials, and so he never quite got into the hierarchical structure, and that's why they all wear green and only Insan wears red. It's a little bit like there's a concept in Persian rug making called the Persian flaw, and it's and they introduce a flaw into their manufacturing of rugs because only God can make perfection. So there's sort of like, we can only wear green, only Insan, or the savior can wear red.
And I gotta say, I appreciate the mention of the duotronic comms relay that Jankom Pog, when he's talking about the 23rd century Class F shuttle, says that has duotronic comms, which would have been a big distinction because he's used to isolinear technology. So those people that obsess over the Star Trek technobabble, it's like, there you go, we got duotronics.
Yeah, I have to give props to our Trek advisor David Mack, because we went back and forth on like all the fun stuff that we wanted down in there. At one point, I tried to get them to give them food cubes that they'd be eating.
Yeah, like the Play-Doh food.
Yeah, but then they'd open up this whole conversation of like would they have replicators on the shuttlecraft? I was like, fine, no food cubes.
They could have just had like a little like a form like you make sushi or something. They just put their food into cubes for no reason.
Yeah.
And people that might be unfamiliar with the character Ensign Garavik, he is from the original series season 2 episode Obsession. So go check that out, streaming on Paramount Plus in the United States. I don't know about other countries, but yeah, it's a good one. I don't think about Obsession a lot, but whenever I'm rewatching the original series and come to that episode, I was like, oh, this is better than I remembered it being. But yeah, for whatever reason, it's not one that I think of very often, except for when I'm watching it.
Well, there's nice character work in it, I think, because you see Kirk get to be vulnerable, and you get to dip into his past a little bit, and you don't see him kind of take an interest in the lower deckers very often. So I think it's very memorable for that reason.
Yeah, and the episode title has a double meaning if you're friends with Starfleet Boy, because as we're pointing out in the comments in the live audience, the Garavik is Starfleet Boy's obsession.
You can't quite see it, but I actually naturally grow
the pointy sideburns.
Pointy sideburns.
Oh, that is so cool. That's awesome.
Devotion to the theme.
Yeah. You were
when
right.
I had hair, I had the same thing.
You were right at the top of the show when you said it's like you were born to be a Star Trek writer. It's like that is destiny. Well, that is very cool. Well, we would love to hear what people out there in the internet world think about this episode. So please comment if you're on YouTube, or you can reply to my tweets, or you can hit us up on the Tex-Trek Facebook page or in the Tex-Trek Discord server. We'd love to hear some feedback, because we like to share audience responses on these episodes. Dave actually has some subspace transmissions we received from last week's episode. So Dave, if you would like to share some of that.
Sure. Yeah, responding to our comments on episode 12, Let Sleeping Borgs Lie. I want to start out with one from one of our long-timers, Cake is Eternal, who on YouTube said, it was great to see Dave back. So that was, I had been out for a couple months. It was great to get back interacting with people again and back on the show. So thank you very much, Cake. I really appreciated it. But moving on to the actual episode, let's see. We had, they were going up against one of Trek's biggest threats, the Borg. And so let's see what Commander Meg on Twitter said. It was pretty spooky. I loved it. Peter Hutchinson said chills, just chills. Phantom Star Crew kind of went on to say, realizing that the new kids had no idea what the Borg were was neat. Any of us watching would have turned and warped away. They got to experience a first encounter with the Borg and slowly realized they were a horror villain in a sci-fi show, just like we did back in the day. I absolutely agree there. There was a little bit of dissent. A view from the Peanut Gallery said, honestly, thought it was a weak episode, but it also felt like it was setting up for later things. I'm pretty sure the events in this story are going to lead to some great stuff later in the season. Wanted to mention that Amy Imhoff and Raconteur Guide both gave shout outs to Zero. Specifically for the episode, let's see, Raconteur Guide said Zero in particular shone with their best energy. Several people mentioned that the show was doing a really good job balancing writing for a young audience and for the longtime Trekkies. But opinions no one cares about over on YouTube said, I attempted to get my kids to watch this show. Didn't work out very well. I think I'll have to try again. And opinions no one cares about also mentioned had a wry observation about Dr. Noam on the Dauntless and said, I don't think all the animated Star Trek doctors need to be grumpy. But yeah, by and large, it seems like people were very happy with the episode.
He's a Tellarite, though, so doubly so.
Yeah, Tellarites need to be grumpy.
And as you pointed out in I think in our chat last week,
he was complimenting her.
It's a Tellarite cranky compliment. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, everybody seemed to really enjoy the spooky vibe of that episode and seeing seeing the Borg make their presence known still out there.
Well, next week we'll be talking about the episode Crossroads. Aaron, I know you have to be careful what you say, but is there anything, it can just be like a single word, but is there anything that you would like to tease people with going into next week's episode Crossroads?
Let's just say that there will be an explosive confrontation.
Oh.
Okay, very enticing.
Can't help but remember the audio track for Wrath of Khan called, I believe, Kirk's Explosive Reply, when he responds to Khan. I always remembered that. Yeah.
Well, I'll be looking forward to that one.
Yeah, I think for the people that are excited to see, Admiral Janeway storyline advance, you'll be very happy.
Yeah, we didn't get a ton of Dauntless this week. Sounds like we're going to get more next week than we had this week.
You're going to get a lot.
Okay.
Flesh Janeway, as Dave calls her.
Yeah. Not to be confused with Hollow Janeway.
I'm sure that's going to catch on. Catch on.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to that one. And until next week, as always, live logs and proper, y'all.
Live logs and proper.
Listen to the Tex-Trek podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at tex-trek.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/tex-trek. And follow Fathery on Twitter at TXTrek. Please support us by liking our videos and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. Thank you and take care.